Okay, so this should work now. And I just have to do that. I'm trying to organize everything so that I can see more, because I want to see the chat. Ooh, and I lost it. Oops. Okay, so we're back. And this should work better this time. But yeah, I'm trying to see the chat, and this time we're back and we're going to get started. And there was a question about the child in my profile picture. That was me when I was a kid. And okay, I won't do anything extra. Okay, so the child in my profile picture was actually me as a child. I was about, I think maybe 4, and my mom had come home and she loved to take pictures at the photo studios. So she took us to the photo studio to take a picture, and the cameraman kept on telling me to smile. And I just made a face when he was like, "What?" And and I just was like, "Okay, just leave me alone." But yeah, that was me at 4 years old. So with this live, this is my first live, somewhat chaotic. And so with this one, I wanted to go over the ancient Egyptian language. And if you guys had any questions, I expected to spend about maybe 45 minutes to an hour. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I will get this screen organized so I can see the chat, because I can only see the chats off the streaming software. So I'm trying to kind of share my screen real estate so that I can see everything while showing everything that I want to show. So we are going to basically, you can ask any questions if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer them as this goes on. And so I wanted to start off by explaining how the ancient Egyptian language is basically the Proto-Bantu language. So we all know at this point that ancient Egypt has been attached to the Afro-Asiatics, and it's always like been ancient Egyptian is so isolated from Africa, and it's an Afro-Asiatic language. But there were symbols found in southern Africa, and that's something that most of the travelers and the London Missionary Society scouts would always note, that they would see the houses were painted in southern Africa with the same symbols we find in ancient Egypt. And when I was growing up, when I sort of became conscious of things around me, I think, is when I first noticed it. Like we were going to visit our village, and when we passed by the road that led to our village, which was the next village to the Sibugu, who is the headman, around the headman's house were paintings of crocodiles, and I remember them vividly because they kind of struck me. That was when I started thinking as a kid, I guess. And I remember thinking, why do they have the crocodile across the house like that? And there were also discs, but that is the symbol of Sobek, what was translated by Egyptologists to mean Sobek. And Sobek had the crocodile symbol. And can you guys see my screen? like it. Sobek did have the crocodile strain. I mean the crocodile symbol. But please let me know if you can hear me clearly and if you can see my screen and what I'm showing right now. I hope it's not the software. But so where was I? So that was the symbol. The crocodile and the discs are the symbol of the Sibugu. And those were the same symbols on the Zimbabwe soapstone birds. Those are the same symbols because that was the court of the Sibugu. So these symbols were found in southern Africa, and they were found all across the eastern part of Africa up to ancient Egypt. They were because they were the same people. Now, what ended up happening, it seems, was ooh, it's stuck again. Okay. All right. Okay, I'll just keep talking while I unstick it. What ended up happening was sort of an attempt to distance Southern Africa or just Africa proper from ancient Egypt. And okay, because I need this open. I need the chat open because that's the only way I'll be able to see you guys with the chat. Hang on just a second. I thought, all right. Yeah, I don't have anything connected. It's just my computer running at this point. Let me see. I suppose it's, I'm using Streamlabs and they're supposed to restart the recapture. Let me see what I can do here. And let me restart it and see what it does for me. Because sometimes when you restart it, it works, but apparently it's not working. Hang on, let me push this down then. Let me try that. But this also means I can barely see anything from the chats because I was trying to keep the chat up. Oh. Hang on. Let me minimize it then as small as possible. Let me put it somewhere here in the corner. Okay, I won't restart it. I just need to put it in the corner somewhere, and that seems to be fine. Okay. So when we look at the ancient Egyptian language, there are a lot of words that, or expressions rather, that are found in the Bantu languages across the board because the Bantu languages share a source. Now, Bantu is not a made-up word. It exists in our languages, and that's why my first video was Bantu doesn't mean people, because it really doesn't, because our language is actually a very ancient language, and ancient languages were built on morphemes. So each sound has a meaning because this was, hello, wildflower. This was a sound, this language had a meaning. I mean, each sound had meaning. So ancient languages were built on sounds, and these sounds were sort of, at least with the Bantu language, it's based on song. So each sound has a meaning, and it has, thank you so much, it has a meaning, and also it has a pitch. So that's why most people who speak a Bantu language can sing very well, because when we're speaking, we're actually practicing. Our voices are actually getting a lot of practice with singing. So this is based on old harmonies. So like the expression Bantu, it has three sounds, va, n, and tu. So each one of those sounds has its own pitch. And so, and it also has a meaning. And this is where we, as the owners of the languages and the cultures, have to start investing in explaining our languages, because if other people explain them, they will just, think it's a word or whatever, but it's not a word. It's an expression. And Va means the ideal manifestation of the first guardians. N, the N sound, which is N, is different from the squig, like the wavy line N. That's Na. This one means absolute certainty. Tu means we, like tuli uli, and on top of that, there are also some little language nuances that need to be known, and I'll cover these as we go on. But for now, the words that were found so in ancient Egypt, for example, Majwi Nejari, which is what the ancient Egyptians called their language, and Egyptologists called this Meduneta, or they put in their own vowels to help them pronounce these vowelless words, because expressions, because they didn't know what the vowels are. Okay, so the screen might be stuck again. And I have restarted the capture. I might have to have a delay in it. Okay. Exactly. So one of the things that ends up happening is we have, so for example, we find words that are similar. For example, in my language, is one of the things with my language is that it's one of the older languages because people weren't invaded. And that's why we were able to maintain that language structure. And whenever things happened, I suppose they went up to the mountains, or they had really powerful high priests who practiced what the pharaoh Khufu's name is based on. It's called Guvuna. Guvuna means to be covered, to be veiled. And that means that people around you cannot see you, or only the people that you want can see you. And this is, I made a video about the British that were looking for these portals in Zimbabwe, where people complained of hearing people they couldn't see, and that was the same science of Guvuna. So our priests knew how to do that, and they were targeted for that eventually, because they seem to have disappeared after David Livingstone found out where they were. They seem to have died, but that's for another story. But where was I? So the pharaoh Khufu, Wuvuna, they would cover their area, and this would isolate them, and that's how our language was most likely maintained, because it's very old. And that's why, like, I could recognize, like, when I started really reading the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, I started to recognize a lot of the expressions. They weren't foreign to me because these are expressions I grew up speaking. And they actually reminded me of my grandparents and how they spoke. And so it was just kind of like, oh, okay. I mean, I was confused, but I was excited. And here we are. So this screen shows sort of like a few examples of some words. I made sure to pick words that would be considered deep or more advanced, because languages, you can say languages are similar if they have shared advanced vocabulary, because elementary vocabulary just says there was contact. For example, if people are trading, they pick up words from each other's languages and then they start using them. It's casual contact. But you have these words that are passed down through the ancestral, through the kin line. Like you have to have relatives if you are going to know what those words are. And these are some of the words that are sort of more cultural. They're sort of kin-based. You have to have someone who knows. Okay, so the reason I have this screen right now, I would like to have a pen with me, but I would be using my mouse. I should have probably used something different, my pen. So, for example, this hieroglyph here, so this one means a thing. And we see this by that H and T. Hold on. That H is usually KH. That is how it's pronounced. And it's missing the vowels. So you have KHT, which are the consonants. And hello, thank you for joining us. And so what it is the ancient Egyptian language, when it was written without vowels. So here, when we say, and this was probably an old translation, but so here we have to determine what vowels are missing, and usually we have a determinative which helps us. I got this from Gardner's text, and a thing in our language is either when you say jintu or yintu, it's into. It usually ends in into. And so this is sort of one of those examples of a missing data from the transliteration. I need to find the actual, wait, I need to find the determinative for this one. I may have copied it wrong, but let's move on to something I copied right. So, and which one is easily recognizable for everyone, most likely, is this one. R and N are interchangeable, and this meant name in ancient Egypt. So we would say Lina, like Ilina liago. Others would say Rina because R and N to us sound the same. And because they're missing an N here, for a thing is, this was missing an N. I would have to go back to the source of the one that has all the hieroglyphs and get all the transliterations for that top part, all the variations for it, because usually there's that N sound that is that N sound is sort of it's used to express absolute certainty, and it's used for emphasis. That's why we put it, sometimes it's put in the wrong spaces where like everything has like an N sound. You kind of hear it like mbonya or wana. No, that's not it. Or nkambo. It's kind of like sometimes people use it to stress, and it kind of comes down to the discretion of the speaker, which is why sometimes it appears in certain places and sometimes it doesn't appear in certain places. Okay, I'll make it bigger. So here, for example, ilina, we would say, when I add the I, it's just out of trying to be grammatically correct, but lina liago, like what's your name, we would say lina. So we know that the missing vowels are I and A. So this is li, the sound li is the sound of the most beautiful sound. That is when we go, when at celebrations, when people make the sound, that is the li sound, the most beautiful sound. And then na is the sound of the perfect reflection. That is the sound, because these are the alphabet sounds. And so when these sounds are sort of conjugated, they create the language that we know. So you can use li in different ways, like malindi, lima, wulima, lila, and na is sometimes people might use it in like words like najona when they want to express a perfect reflection. Najona. Oh, oh gosh, I can only think of that one right now. But that is, it's used in different contexts too. So the M sound is also interesting. This is the ow. It can be, so this one is interesting because it has two variations. There's and then there's like muya or mwana. Mwana doesn't have an M-U sound. It's just M, then wana. Then we have like a hard M, like a mu, muya. Muya is different from the mwana sound because one is transient and then the other one is infinite permanency. So the one without the U, the one used in mwana, is more of a transient sound that expresses that what we are saying can change. For example, your state as a child can change it. So you use that M without the permanency to express that change in state. Now the mu sound is, okay, so let me try that again. I've made it a little bigger. So the mu sound the mu sound tells us that there's more of a permanency, because mu basically means, let me find my nice little dictionary. I put these in a nice dictionary. I just have to remember which one carries my dictionary. Okay, this is my dictionary. Let me make sure you're able to see this. So apparently with this software, I might have to be restarting the capture every few minutes. I'm sorry about that. I'll probably use a different one if I can find one next time. But I'll probably learn how to use this one better. So these are all the basic sounds. I have them on my coffee in the shop. It's if you're interested in learning the basic sounds in all the Proto-Bantu languages, these are the sounds that make up our words and what they mean. So, for example, mu is the mu with the U is the sound of infinitely within, being infinitely part of something. So you are within. And this is very different from wa, this wa here, the WA sound. This means of, the sound of infinite, of being infinitely within or part of something is different from being of that thing. And this is why the language is very, it requires a lot of thought in explaining and understanding, because it's not a label-based language like English. It's not like, oh, we have a word for apple and we instead explain the state of an apple. We describe the state of an apple. We just don't have a word for it, and this is why um, the word for mwezi is different. Let me find that. I had a really nice little thing set up for that. So, for example, the word for moon is different. Mwezi is sort of uh, the way we say moon. So, but the meaning of mwezi is, as you can see, mwezi uses the transitional M, not the mu M, but the M, mwezi. It's mwezi, not muwezi, because the moon changes. The cycle of the moon isn't permanent. It's transitional, so it changes. And then we means is the sound for you, like we mwana, we your name. That is the how we express you, the word you. And then z is the sound of absence. Muzimo, guzika. For example, muzimo are ancestors because they're absent. Guzika is to bury something. So that is why whenever we see this Z sound in African history and language, we know that whatever is being described was something that changed the state or created a state of absence. And it's very, very, thank you so much. It's very it's very nuanced. Our language, like this language is really beautiful. Like there's so much thought that we have to put in when explaining things, and that's why it's very it's deep and it's very poetic. And when we start to explain the ancient Egyptian language, it's been very difficult to sort of do a one-to-one explanation because I needed sort of the algorithms to understand these nuances. And it wasn't just like, because they're not labels. We are singing and we're being poetic when we speak. So we are describing the world around us when we speak, and it's very beautiful like that. And the other example I had of this was izuba. And izuba, like the E sound, is a sound that denotes a specific idea or object. It is not supposed to be used for a person. That's why when we hear it being used with, say, the more the Nguni dialects, where they call a woman intombi, it's like we know that is not us, because women were when these groups started forming, women were seen as property. They weren't respected and they were being abducted and dehumanized. So that E attaching to a woman who is considered the life force was a way of dehumanizing women. And we don't use it. There's a mistranslation in one of these older books where it says, like, in our language we say kazi, mukazi for a woman. That is, we don't use that word. That is nyanja or shona, because mukazi means a barren woman, and that would not be used in a respectable society. That is actually an insult. At least back then it was meant to insult or wish the woman ill. So she was called mukazi. We say musimbi, which means the paramount life giver or the creator of life. And so these are sort of like, once you understand the sounds and what they mean, it makes us more aware and more like you start to appreciate what the language is. um, zoo, let's get back to the sun. Sorry, I segued to that. I'm going to try my best to keep it here. But zoo means it denotes space or infinite light. And everything, the sounds that have the longer sound, like zoo, va, those are infinite. They denote like an infinite idea. Like this is complete, and 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 that is why I explained mukazi because because it's like the first I know the Chewa people use it and the Nyanja people use it, and the Shona people I think use it when they call a female elephant njovukazi, and it sounds nice, but it's when you kind of listen to the meaning behind it, it helps us understand what was happening to people, because our language carries history and all the words that are used are historically significant. Shungwai. That is my first time seeing that expression, shungwai. I will look into it. Thank you so much. So like here, Va denotes the ideal manifestation of the Vaila, the first guardians. So when we say Izuva, we are saying the infinite space of the ideal manifestation of the first guardians. So this has to do with how or infinite light, because the first guardians, this tells us about them that they were light beings, and that's why they looked like the sun. So this is what this means. It tells us a lot about our history, and as people, what the ancient world was, Izuba. And sometimes people do spell it as SU or ZU. It has the same meaning. It comes down to pronunciation. Uzuba or Subia, Uzuba, Zuba is sort of, it's the same sound, but it's I wouldn't say interchangeable, but it's sort of like the R and the L. It's kind of the same, has the same idea. And so, and then now I'm going to go to the title of the book of, what is that called? The Book of the Dead, which is titled by Egyptologists as, they say it's coming forth by day. But the title, the actual title implies, and this is the simplistic explanation, and then I'll go into the deeper explanation, it actually means to say, beloved perfect reflection of the foremost guardians, lovingly called to what was found at the beginning. Because the beginning in our culture is the starting point of perfection. And I will do more of these because I'm still getting used to it, and I hope that I get the technology right. And I will get it right. But I would love to do more of these. I think they're better than the videos for me, actually. So to read that together, we have lu nah ita lu janwa tanguna. So lunaha ita lujanwa guta atanguna. Tanguna means the beginning. Lujanwa means what was found. This is the same wujana, twajana. and Ulujanwa is the same. Ita is guita, guitwa, to be cold. I'm cold. You're being cold. Guita. Lunaha. Lunaha is like is basically an old word or expression that means beloved. It's sometimes used to mean land, like beloved land by some of the derived Bantu speakers. But here it means beloved, perfectly reflected, foremost, or the foremost incarnation of the first guardian. So beloved, perfect, reflected, foremost reincarnation, called beloved, found at the beginning. Now, you may have noticed the language doesn't have conjunctions, it doesn't have joining words. Because it's complete, you're singing a song, and you are supposed to be poetic when you speak it, and you're supposed to think about what you're speaking, what you're saying, because sometimes the conjunctions do distract from the speech, and these expressions are supposed to be said in the present tense, and you're supposed to sort of embody what you're speaking. Guita. Yes. It is the same word, guita. And so, tanguna. Yes, to start to lead at the beginning. Let me see if it's showing what I am saying. It seems I have to sort of come back and forth and recapture what I'm saying. Recapture the screen. It should be showing now. I think it should be showing. So, like I explained before, the language is based on harmony, melody, and poetry. And this makes it rather tricky to translate one to one. And I'm still working on really breaking it down so that, say, an algorithm can easily understand what I'm saying. And so let me move to this part, which shows some similar words that are present that some might recognize. Okay. So these are some words that you might recognize from your own languages, like hatupa. Hatupa is sometimes people drop the ha, because we are the like in my I guess, what am I going to call it? Like for my vana, we are sort of the ha. We use a lot of ha or the h sound, so everything is hia, hintu, hatupa. We do a lot of the ha ha thing. Some people do the sha, and other people do the she or the si sounds. So, for example, hintu, they would say either they would go sin tu, or they would say, I don't know if they say sha, but I know the shas do have that, and they go shamuli, like that is a term of endearment for like a male lover. Like if you have most women would call their husbands shamuli, like my beloved, my foremost beloved, because that Shah, which is the same Shah in Gasha, which is Kush, means foremost. And then Muri means beloved, foremost within the most beautiful sound. So foremost within the most beautiful manifestation of sound, because we believe that sound manifested us, which is why how we pronounce words is very important, how we speak is very important, because words do manifest realities, and you have to have the correct melody and the frequency to do it. And I think that's why, if you want to open the, well, I won't go into that just yet. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. So this expression is stability, and this one is present as jade. This is the de in ngombe ile de or ile de, vaye de. When the Nguni say vaye de, this is what they're using. They're saying, "Oh, hail to the people who keep us stable." Gonde. Gonde is like the place of stability. It's our holy or sacred place. And just basically de yamwana is like the stability. And stability was very important. It's these are synonyms, so whatever is synonymous with stability is what ja de means. Now the ja is basically not of per se, but it is kind of in that, loosely translated, it would be like of stability. And then the next one is gupala or gupara. Like R and L are interchangeable, and gupala means to look like or to resemble. This is the sound of this is the beetle, the ancient Egyptian beetle. I think I have it somewhere here, but that's what they called it. Upala. Upala ni vapala vantu, vapala vana, vapala vauhi, vapala vanina. This is the upala, to look like. Then gavo is earth. Here they spelled it as geb, but we have to remove that E. That's not the correct spelling. That's just a made-up vowel, but it's gavo. It's like a g, gavo. Gajea gavo. Kotwalwa ninalesa. Mighty. That's the song the rainmakers sing when they are asking for rain. That's part of it. It means the earth has shrunken. Sadness, like the earth has shrunken that we fought for with the guardians. Sadness. It means come help us expand it. And then the next one is Vana Vajade. Vana Vajade. This is what the ancient Egyptians called themselves. They called themselves Vana Vajade. And if you search this vowelless transliteration, it's found on Wiki and all of the other places where their language was translated. The next one is Wawona. Wawona means, we take it to mean, have you seen, do you see? Well, strictly speaking, it means to rise and to be seen or to be revealed. Ndawona means I have seen. This is where the sawona comes from too. Sawona means sa is familiars. The familiars, musa, that's our word. It's not an Arabic word. Musa is from our language. It means musa is or basa. Those are terms of endearment and affection. And the sa means familiar, my familiar. You are my person, my kin. And wana is, na is perfectly reflected. And then, let's see, wo, I want to make sure I get this right, is the sound of infinite. Ooh, I did not add it there. gosh, because V is the sound of infinite creation, Wu is the sound of infinite energy, Wo is the sound of infinite presence. Presence, that was the one. It was presence. So the next one is Noli. Like Nefertiti's name is actually that NFR or NFL, that F, Noli, Noli. It's like a Noli. Or because I do a lot of H sounds, so we convert a lot of this F sound to an H sound, but it's Noli. It's like fli. And this name is found across Southern Africa. Nolianga. Nolianga is the most famous use of this expression, or Noli. When people want to express an idea of beauty or just an idea of complete bliss, they would say Noli. And then I think I'm still on the old pages. No, let me just do that. Because I haven't really switched to, I'm still kind of going through the Noli and Agati means Noli, yes. Agati means the middle or horizon, Agati. And then we have Palo or Palo, which means home or place where I sleep. Malo was what they called the pyramids or the place of rest. And some people might recognize this Malo in Wumalo, like Kumalo. That is the same Malo, except we say Wumalo. Other people would say Kumalo. That is the place of rest or the place of the graveyards sometimes. And then we have the last one I wanted to go over was Akhenaten's name. Gosh, Akhenaten's name. I said Aga Najitene. Aga Najitene. Jitene Ali, like when you're asking, is it here yet? Like Jitene Ali, something that is bound to happen but hasn't yet happened. We'll use the expression Jitene. Na is absolute truth. And then Aga, Oyu, Aga Najitene. That is Akhenaten's name. And the thing that convinced me that this was actually a Bantu language was the presence of these advanced words, which are Waja, Diva. Like I explained, like these words, advanced words, are not found in casual exchanges. You have to have been part of the culture and raised within it to understand these advanced words. And when in the morning, for example, early morning, we say waja, like waja. It's kind of like it means early morning. Gujiva means to block. Magati, yes. And Gujiva means to block. And then these are the two expressions that really convinced me that this was the same language, because they would not be found elsewhere. Oh, now I think I know why you're saying the screen is not changing when you change, because I think It's the latency. There's a delay in the screen. I think YouTube, because I'm streaming it from one software and then sending it to YouTube, and then YouTube is picking it up. But I'm trying not to break it right now. So I'll fix it in the next live, I promise. But thank you so much for sticking with it. So the last expression I want to go over is nejali wo, because whenever we have like an event or a wedding or anything that makes people happy, we sing nejali wo nejali jibot, nejali wo nejali jibot, and so nejali wo is like, what it loosely translates to is, if it was always this way, it would be blissful. It would be blissful. So nejari is sort of nostalgic for a time of bliss. Like, we use that to express that time of bliss, and nejari. So majwi, nejari. Majwi is has three sounds in it. There's ma, which means plenty. Ju. Ju is high, and this is the same do, like wuddula. When something is too expensive, we would say jadula, or let me see if I can think of another expression that has doing it. Dubula. It's the same, something that is high, of great height. And then we is something that is of infinite, like an infinite marvel. We, it's because a woman is basically, she's called Nawinga. That is a way of, that's a term of endearment, the perfect reflection of an infinite marvel. That's what her husband would call her. And she would call him Shamori. And so it's like, all of these sounds, I guess, have a meaning. That's what I'm getting at here, and that's what I wanted to ensure was understood. And these meanings, like I said earlier, I have them sort of written out for anybody interested in understanding. And they are all like, it helps sort of understand, and these are available in the coffee link. So they help you explain what each sound means. And do I think the language came from Southeast? Actually, it was present from North Africa down to Southern Africa. The entire region, from Southern Africa, East Africa, the Great Lakes, Ethiopia, ancient Ethiopia. I don't talk about Ethiopia because it's kind of like touch and go there right now. I'm still like understanding the sensitivities in that place. But it went up all the way to ancient Egypt. They all spoke the same language. This is the Proto-Bantu language. This is the original language. And these people were once the biggest population in Africa. And this is where they lived. Now, and they knew each other. They moved and they intermarried with one another. They had the same culture. This is why the cow horn dance is present in all these regions. Ancient Egypt has the little figurine of the cow horn dance. East Africa has it. Southern Africa has it. And then there's a dance in Ethiopia that is done by the Tigrayan people. The people of Tigray is sort of like it's called Sipelu. It's also performed by the Subia and the Marotsi, who are mostly Subia and Banabajundu because they were abducted into that, what became the Barotsi or the Lozi people. So a lot of the women who made up that population were Proto-Bantu ancestry, and they do the Sipelu dance, and I forget what it's called in Tigray in Ethiopia, but they have the same motion and it's the same dance. They perform it at festivals, and so it's these cultural nuances, I think, like that are still present, even just cultural continuity, where you have cattle herding is very important, and this is often misunderstood as being a nomadic people's skill, but it wasn't originally nomadic people who herded cattle. Matter of fact, the nomadic cattle herders are nomads because they were stealing the cattle and had to move before they were caught. Because the worst thing you can do is steal cattle, really, from cattle herders. They don't forgive that, and they hunt people down when they do that. And so that's why these nomadic cattle herders exist, because they were stealing the cattle and they had to move. And we know that they were stealing the cattle because there were only one group of people who had the horned cattle, and those were the Bantu. And those horned cattle all came from the Bantu people. So anybody that had those had to have stolen them from the Bantu. That's how they got them. Because the Bantu didn't give their cattle. They didn't trade their cattle. Like, we don't do that. We don't trade cattle. It's Usambala. It will be loaned to somebody who would, it's a cooperative. It's called Usambala Ngombe. It's a cooperative, and then people sort of loan the cattle out to be taken care of, and the payment that the people get is whenever the cattle are doing well, they'll get a cow out of it and grow their own herd. So the idea that there was no trading of cattle at all. And we know that's how we know that the horned cattle were initially Proto-Bantu cattle, and anybody that had those between basically 800 AD to 1900 stole them. And that's why they had to become nomads, because we know how to herd cattle, and you know that cattle are not supposed to be, they're moved to grazing pastures, but you find the different grazing pastures, and that's why they had cattle camps, so that the young men would take the cattle out to the cattle camps, to the seasonal cattle camps, and they would graze them, and they would come back with the cattle at the end of the season. So there was no, they were settled people. And so the horned cattle are very important. They also practiced bull leaping, which was, I know the Sudanese people do have a version of bull leaping too. And I will touch on the Sudanese very soon, because a lot of their cultural practices do overlap with the Proto-Bantu cultural practices, because they were abducting people into their midst. And that's why they also have rainmakers. But that is because of the abductions. And that's where the idea of, I had this conversation with somebody who was asking how people, like, basically they say, well, everyone got sold during during slavery. And I said, no, not everyone got sold. You have to understand that there was an issue of bloodlines. This is why the Abyssinians, who today would be considered a beauty standard, they were sold far more often than a Proto-Bantu woman, because a Proto-Bantu woman was considered more, was about bloodlines. So if they kept her, they could have a claim or validate their claim to the Proto-Bantu bloodline, which is the children, the Vana Vajundu, Vana Vajate, the children of the first guardians. They would have that bloodline in their bloodline. So they weren't necessarily selling these women, and that's why when you look at when you look outside Africa and you kind of look at the populations or you try to estimate the ethnicities of the people that were sold into slavery or they were abducted, you to the Americas, South America, North America, the islands, you can sort of pretty much tell sometimes which ethnic group they came out of. Not all the time, but sometimes you can kind of tell which ones are missing, like who doesn't have a high representation in these populations. And this brings me to why people ended up speaking the Bantu language. I'm just going to touch on this very quickly. It had to do with this same idea of bloodlines where they were inheriting Guyola. They were inheriting the identity of the people that they had murdered because they believed it would give them more, like it would make them more like them. They wanted to adopt their virtues. So they would basically unalive the men and breed the women and assault them and force them to breed their descendants. And we see this, and that's why they would adopt certain aspects of the culture, which they believed would bring them luck, because when they unalived people, especially men, they would basically boil and eat the men that they considered great, so that they could basically adopt their virtues, I guess. And so that's how the culture sort of was adopted and spread. And since these people brought in their own people that they had been abducting and enslaving while they were seafaring, because those vessels that they had needed they needed rowers. They were a very labor intensive society, and they would basically, they needed a large population to carry the loot, to row the boats. And so they would sort of, and I have a picture of the rowers, the number of rowers they had. Really, it was a lot of people. And so this, oh, that's probably in my hard drive. But that's why this is, and so when they kind of created these societies, they needed them to sort of speak, because they were trying to cosplay as Bantu. So they started making people speak a version of the Bantu language. And that's why most people started speaking it. That's another reason, apart from the abduction of children too. But here you say that early explorers called the kings Wahuma, or with Huma meaning moving the cattle, making noise. Moving the cattle, making noise. Huma. So, Uhuma, like when we see that Uhuma is yes, it is associated with moving cattle, and also it's like haste. Usually when it's used in our context, wuhuma or wahuma, it means to make haste, urgency, to because the hu is the sound of infinite abundance, and ma is the sound of, yes, huma, infinite abundance, and ma is the sound of plenty. So it does mean to be rich, like well, uhuma is like infinite abundance, but well, it can be used in that context, but I'm sorry, I made a mistake there because we use Guhuba, Mahuba. That was my grandfather's mother's name, Mahuba. Huba means rich. That's what we say means to be wealthy. Guhuba. Guhuma means to make haste. Like if you want somebody to make haste, you say tulahuma, or we'll make haste in the morning, like tulahuma waja, and that would be to make haste in the morning. Uhuba, uhuba. Hu again is the sound of infinite abundance, and va is the manifestation of the vaila or the first guardian. So, sound of infinite abundance, the sound of the manifestation come together to create wuhuba. That is wealth for us. Muhumagadi. 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 I've always been fascinated. Okay, I guess by how Gadi, by the Gadi expression, because D means a place or how, like, then that's interesting actually. Okay, let me first finish this with D. Omahadi. When we say D, we mean like a dindi. D is the sound of infinite depth, because all of these are sounds, and these are sounds of creation. At creation, the sound of infinite depth was D. D. So when we say Gadi, it's like life force of infinite depth. That would be Mohuma Gadi. That's interesting. But Himma, Himma, we would say to stand up. Like he is the sound of greatness or might, infinite greatness. He, Hintu, Himma, Uhiva is the sound of infinite greatness or might. And then when we add ma at the end, ma is an emphasis. When ma is put at the end, that it's put to emphasize what we are saying, which is himma, the sound of greatness or might, and then ma is plenty. It still maintains its meaning, but it's sort of appended to emphasize that we are saying this is plenty greatness, and this is why to stand up is goima or gohima, is to stand up. Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys for being here. I really do. Mahube. Mahube is red sunrise. Mahube. That's interesting. So Mahube. And that might have to do, Mahube might have to do with Ve, meaning the sound of the infinitely treasured and true companion, like the Veja. And this is where like it becomes very interesting with the language, because Veja can be taken to mean a lie, Waveja, like you're lying. But what does that really mean when you say Veja? Because the sound of an infinitely treasured companion is and that's ve, and then ja or ja is the sound of infinite belonging. So infinitely treasured companion, infinite belonging. So when we say waveja to mean you're lying, it means that whatever you're saying doesn't belong to you, but it belongs to an infinitely treasured companion. And that's what that's how nuanced the language is. Like that's how just deep it is. And it's not, a lie is doesn't exist. Like there's no word for lie, but there's a meaning. Like you could be saying something that belongs to someone else is not yours, and that's what makes what you're saying a lie. It is very deep, very, very, very deep. It's a wonderful it's a wonderful language, and also it's an old ancient language, and that's why I sort of did create the alphabet. I will say this again because once you know the basic sounds, you will know what each expression means. Even the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs start to make sense because you're able to contextualize them, and you're able to follow along better. I was asked about the Book of the Dead. I I'm working right now because I know that switching loses my accent, and there are words that um, you're supposed to sort of say them in a specific. You're supposed to pronounce them in a specific way, and that's what creates that authenticity. And sometimes I know that because I switch accents, I don't stress my words anymore. It it kind of does affect my pronunciations, and I'm practicing it, and I'm also getting out of that habit. We say veja, veja, veja. Oh, that's interesting. Veja. Yeah, because ve is like treasure companion, and then ja is belonging to a treasure companion. So it makes sense that it would be used in the context of a gift. So, so this brings me to the book of the so-called Book of the Dead, or Coming Forth by Day, which is basically the book of the beginning, the book of being called back to the beginning. It has many chapters, and I was asked if I could translate it, but it would take a while to do so. I would rather first um, do an app and then allow people to translate. I'm actually working on that app. I've been working on it for a very long time. I do put it away and I do start back again. And once we get it enough funding for that, we can sort of finish it and sort of have that published in the App Store soon. Because the idea is for everyone to sort of have this connection, and I wanted to sort of put African languages into it, starting with the proto-languages, the source languages, and then show how each language sort of was derived from the source, because there is a pattern to the derivatives, and you can sort of follow along. And because right now we've already established that the ancient Egyptian language is part of the source, so it didn't change from the beginning to the Hellenization, which was in like 342 or 43 BCE. They spoke the same language. Oh, okay. All right. So with the app, I have like an iOS app that I've been working on for a while now, and it it's meant to allow non-native speakers to translate the ancient Egyptian language to English using the Proto-Bantu language, or the language that I speak because I found that it's right now it's the closest one to the ancient Egyptian language. Like we can read the ancient Egyptian language without changing anything, and we have the alphabet to show for that. And so with that, the idea is to build on that and um, show how the different African languages also derive from these core languages and the admixture in the other languages, so that we can sort of have a way to trace which one is which and how much admixture it has. I was going to focus on finding the Sutu, um, the Sutu language admixture, and also Swana, because Swana and Sutu do have Neolithic admixture. I speak Lozi, Silozi, which is derived from Sutu too, because I speak Himanansa Tonga, that is on my paternal side, and then on my maternal side, I speak Silozi, but that's because my mom's father was Silozi, but my mom's mother was Nkoya, Suvia, so she was part of the bigger Proto-Bantu group, and then her own mother was actually abducted from my father's tribe. So we kind of so we have from that I think I have a background to sort of understanding these proto languages, I guess, because Sutu is one of the earliest derivatives of the Proto-Bantu and Nilotic mix, and identifying which words are from the Sudanese or the Nilotic contribution in the Sutu-Swana languages, we would be able to tell which group of the Sudanese people invaded. And that allows us to sort of trace back in time and understand exactly where they came from and who they were. And that's why understanding the amount of admixture in any language is very important, and it shouldn't be scary. It should, for example, the nya sound that is mostly used in the Great Lakes region, right? Nya is sort of a very important sound in the Sudanese languages, and this tells us a lot that they were there, and they changed some things to that point. And it's I think it means girl, and they are such an important part of African history. And to tell African history without them is to not do our stories justice, because all of us have been touched by them, whether we like it or not. We have, and even if you get married today, chances are you're going to marry somebody who has who has a history with them. So it's important to just be comfortable with understanding what happened, I think. And that's why it comes down, that's why I focus so much on language, because language is something that we treasure and we don't easily give up, because it's our identity. It connects us to our past, and we want to keep our mizimo with us. And so we kind of keep it as authentic as we can. And how we speak, we try our best, especially as we get older, to speak in the way that our grandparents spoke, and that's how we pass on those values. And that's why I focus on language. So I think that the app is going to start with the ancient Egyptian, and it's going to focus on because there was a lot of interest with translating the ancient Egyptian language. There's been a lot of interest with that, and that's what that focuses on. I have a separate Himanansa Vanavajundu Proto-Bantu app that is meant like for like people who want to learn that language, or just like my kinfolk. That's who would be interested in that, I think. And but also the ancient Egyptian translation app will have our alphabet, because that's what I'm using to translate the ancient Egyptian language. And knowing the alphabet or the core sounds allows a person to understand what they're saying by matching the core sound to the hieroglyph. Yes. So it is it it is the so the Bantu language, and this is the part where um, I'm not sure if the linguists did it deliberately, because they should have known, or maybe they found people they didn't expect, so they tried to rewrite it instead of understanding what had happened. Um, because there's a lot of evidence of it being spoken, and just even in ancient Somalia, and I'm speaking about before the Sultanate, or before the Sultans established themselves in Somalia. These are the ancient people before Islam. There were a lot of places that had Bantu names over there. Even Mogadishu. Mogadishu was transformed to be Somalia, and so it's Muga means, it's basically the title of a married woman. She'll be Muga and her husband's name, and usually it's his nickname, Muga, and then his nickname. And Muga means within or part of the life force of. Then Mogadishu, as in Mogadishu, is J, is the is it mean it's a connecting word like the, or I think that's what it's called. But Shu is wind, or a great water vapor, like Shungu Namutitima. That's what we call the Victoria Falls. It's Shungu Namutitima. It's like Shu is a great water vapor, or air, like wind. A great wind is what is Shu. And because that region was near a great wind, it's a coastal region that's near a great wind. So do you guys have any questions? I think I've gone way past what I expected to do, which was an hour, but I'm glad you guys stuck around. And remember, I think I would do another one on the Musimo. Yes, when we die, we do become ancestors, and Muzimo is one ancestor. So when you say Muzi Mubantu, wow, that is poetic. Muzi Mubantu, Muzimo, Mubantu, and then, oh wow, yeah, that is quite poetic. It's like Muzi Mubantu, one that returns to be part of the living. Huh. Now, would that be a ghost? How would you say ghost? Or reincarnation? Okay, so sometimes I do make an effort to read their rebuttals, sorry. And one of the things that I have heavily relied on is linguistics. Because you see, anyone can steal an artifact and claim it to be theirs. Anyone can do that. I mean, the pyramid would have been stolen and put in in France somewhere, or England, and we wouldn't know, like we would think they built it. So the thing with artifacts, and that's why I don't rely on them, is because there was a lot of looting and raiding, and a lot of things were stolen from people and they were taken into other populations, and that's where you find them today. Does that mean they belong to them? Maybe if we look into the culture, we can understand whether it did or not. And how do you look into a culture? By understanding language. Because language is identity. What we say, what we speak, tells people who we are. And that's why when you speak, anytime you get into a room and you speak, your education level, your childhood can be, somebody can estimate that from the way you speak and from the way you present yourself in your words. So language is very, very important. It tells our story. That's why I pointed out, like, it gives us context and history. When women are called intombi or kazi, you kind of stop for a second and you wonder why. Why were they called? But when you look into it, you realize that the E sound was because women were property when these populations started, and they were basically not considered human. So that's why they were basically called a thing. That's what it translates to, a thing. And so I focus more on language because I think there's more to be learned from language, and I always tell most Africans to understand their languages because there's a lot of history. You cannot explain yourselves if you don't know the language. You cannot explain it because somebody else will tell you who you are if they know your language or parts of it. And that's why a lot of, like, when I'm reading a lot of these records that were written by Europeans, I'm able to tell what they're saying or where they went to based on the words they're using. I'm able to tell what they mean, or I'm able to pick up on the nuances or what they're not really saying, the silent parts too. So I focus more on language for that reason. And I avoid genetics because genetics are, I think, they need context, because a lot of people were being stolen, abducted. So there was a lot of shift and there was a lot of flux. Like, people would be abducted and they would go live in one population for a while. They would have children there. Then they would find their way back to their original population with their children. So now they were bringing new genes into the population. So now this creates a change in the gene pool. And then sometimes, for example, like a lot of the Batonka or the Batonga people took in a lot of refuge-seeking people. And sometimes some of these people would marry with those new populations and their gene pool would change. But they would still be practicing the culture. They would still be identifying as the culture. So there was a lot of change in genetics too. And it wasn't the only people really that, and even today after the 1900s, when the countries we have today were created, like when they started being created in the 60s, that again created a shift in the genetics to some extent, because people were now only marrying within a country versus before maybe they had been marrying across the border with their relatives across the border, but now they felt like they were marrying in the country. Because, and we see it more perhaps maybe for our generation, and millennials, and also like the next generation after that. Not sure which one it is, but we see them marrying more. Um, they marry their schoolmates, the people they went to school with, and most of our schools were very diverse. They were no longer sort of cultural schools. Just like you only had people, your clans, your ethnic group in that school, but you had people from different ethnic groups. So again, that creates this genetic change or this genetic shift. So I I understand the value of relics and genetics, but I think they require context in order for people to sort of truly understand what they are representing, what it means when they look at what they're seeing. So, okay, so for Hebrew, which Hebrew? That is the question I have with that one, because for me personally, we don't have any ties to Hebrew. None at all. We don't know it, we don't know them. And so I would ask, which source? Which is the source? And for that, we would have to go to the earliest sources of Hebrew. Now, from what I understand right now about the Middle Eastern languages is that they have a lot of admixture. They have a lot of admixture from different populations, and they're languages that are not um, in their original form. They are made up of different contributions. They have multiple contributions. So Hebrew is one of those where I think deserves to be studied, and the starting point for understanding Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, would be to find the ancient scripts, not the scripts that were written after like 500 AD, but the ones earlier, the ones that haven't been tampered with. You find those and you do a comparative analysis with any of the old languages. Right now, Aramaic, modern day Hebrew is said to have been heavily influenced by Aramaic or Assyrian. I'm not sure, but Assyrian has a lot of admixture. When you look at the words from the Assyrian language, it has admixture from different populations, including ancient Egyptian, which is Bantu. That's why some of their titles had Shah in them, or Babylon, I think. Babylon was actually Va something, but it's a Bantu word. Even Jerusalem is a Bantu word. When you kind of remove the made up vowels, it spells up to a Bantu word. But to say Hebrew is Bantu and the source in Bantu is like, well, there were a lot of languages that were influenced. It might be a derivative, but is it Bantu? It was made by people that were not Bantu. So I don't think it can be considered. And for that, though, I find the Hebrew argument very interesting, to be quite honest, is that why can't it stand on its own? Why does it need the Bantu backing behind it to make sense? Because if it's valid, then it should be able to stand. I think, at least that's my own personal opinion, it should be able to stand on its own. Like, you should be able to find the ancient scripts and translate them, and if any of your languages have that admixture, then you should be able to recognize them in Hebrew. I have not found any admixture in Aramaic or Amharic. because when I look at Amharic, that's the Ethiopian language that is directly related to Aramaic. There's really, I mean, I wouldn't say no Bantu admixture, but if it's there, it's minimal. It's hardly recognizable. It's not like you can pick it out immediately you read it, that, oh, it's kind of related to Bantu. Now, on Moses, so my thing with that is, what were they speaking before Moses? Because Mose is like, is a, when you drop the correct spelling of Moses's name doesn't have that extra S. That S was added by the Greeks because they always added a consonant to the end of, at least that's what the records say right now. They always added a consonant to the end of a vowel of a man's name. So Moses was Mose, like Thut Mose, Mose. We have our priest's name is Monze, but it's derived from the same Mose, and that is what his name really was. And he learned from the ancient Egyptians. So if he was the one teaching the people that he is said to have led through the desert, now that story is also kind of up in the air for me, because I don't know whether it really happened. If he's said to have led people in the desert, though, then I think then he would have been teaching them while he was leading them, and he would have had to speak a language to them. So maybe that's how it got admixture and so on. That's what I would think. Okay, so Swana is actually very important in this conversation too, because Swana is actually a perfect example of a Neolithic and Bantu language admixed. It's a perfect example of that. And because it's got equal admixture, because the people who brought the Swana language and created the Swana identity were Neolithic. There's evidence of that. They used to file their teeth. They had the tufts, and they lived at Delagoa Bay area because they came in with the boats. So the Neolithic people, they're said to have come from Basra, Iraq, and their villages, the Shilluk, were organized in a way that some of the Western writers said reminded them of the Hebrew village organization. And so that's why I'm always saying that the whole Hebrew identity is not Bantu, but it's Shilluk. It's Neolithic. It's Neolithic. It's Sudanese, and it's best to look into their history to understand it properly. Because things got mixed up, yes, but they're the ones who brought it with them, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think a lot of people are kind of afraid of that. They're afraid of what that reality means, but we are all here now, so there's it's already done. There's nothing we shouldn't fear. And Mose. So the ze sound means great understanding, like se, but it ends up sounding like ze. Sometimes Mose or ze, it sounds like, and that means great understanding. And some people use it to answer their parents when they're called. They'll say se or ta. I say ta. And then mo is used to describe infinite individuality, like one single, like you, but not you, but that's the idea, like infinite individuality, mo se, mo se. And other people, like in my part of the word, it's also used to describe to bring forth, meaning birth, to bring forth, like mo se, bring forth or give birth. Which tribe am I from? I am Himanansa Vanabajundu, which is also sometimes called Tonga in southern Zambia, and also Valosi. That is on my mom's side, and my mom's dad's side. My mom's side was Subia and Dinkoya, and they're the people who came down from the Great Lakes. And then my dad's people have always been in Southern Africa. Like, we have no stories of ever leaving. And then I have a grandmother somewhere in there who ended up becoming one of my mom's grandmothers because of the abductions. So, yeah, it's a full circle situation. Okay. Woman. With the issue of circumcision, I don't know, like most of the men I know don't practice circumcision. So I think circumcision was one of those things that came and went. It's like it was brought in by someone, then it stayed for a while, and then it wasn't, and then it was removed from the culture after a while, and then other people practiced it, other people did not. And it reminds me of female genital mutilation in a way, because most of the time it's like, oh, female genital mutilation is all over Africa, but it's like, no, because in my culture, intimacy is seen as something to be enjoyed and celebrated. There's more to do with pulling. I guess it's called pulling, but that's another trauma on its own. Some people don't like it because it's traumatic. But the idea is for intimacy, to build intimacy and enjoy it in a safe environment. It's not about basically removing that sense of autonomy from anyone. So that's why the whole idea of female genital mutilation being more of an African practice is, I'm like, no, it was brought in by somebody. Somebody probably did it to be sadistic. They probably found one of the women they had abducted was having an affair, and they did it, and to punish her. So yeah, I think it came from violence because it's too violent. So with circumcision as an identity, I don't think the men down south are circumcised. I don't think so. So I don't know. Maybe they were at some point and they stopped during the wars and the invasions. I have to look into that. But it was, if it was that important, then it should have started again after everything went stable. Ancient Egypt did practice circumcision, and we always have to remember that they were a colony from the interior, so they eventually came into contact with other people, and they evolved to have their own culture, because there was a point in time when Hatshepsut or Hatshepsut sent sent people down south to Pawantu or Punt. They hadn't been back there for a very long time, so they tended to be cut off. But that's the other thing I don't understand. Then, I mean, not that I don't understand, but this is the other thing about the technology that was different, I think, is they tended to have a lot of they used to travel through the portals. That's another reason there were no roads, because they had portals that they traveled through, and they ended up where they needed to go through those portals, which is how the language was preserved, because the level of our language, like down south, the Himanansa Tonga language, even in Uganda, the level of language, authenticity there should have, like, it. The ancient Egyptian language managed to remain authentic, like it managed to withstand all that change that was happening around it. And that's very interesting because usually when a place is invaded over and over again, the language is supposed to change to reflect that, but it doesn't change. It remains the same. And that is something worth investigating and understanding. Because I know that our language didn't change because the priests practiced govona. They would veil themselves, and that allowed the language to remain unchanged. Mm. So, yes, circumcision is pretty complex. It's some people practiced it and others still practice it. Like I know in Zambia there are some populations, I think it's the Luale people. They have, and also in Angola it might be the Mbunda people who have initiation ceremonies and they take the boys out. It's called, I think, one of them is called Mukanda. They take the boys out, and when they come of age, to circumcise them, um, and they still practice it. And this is like when they're teenagers. I remember one of my friends in high school, in primary school, seventh grade, I think, he went for his ceremony. His dad was very pro culture, so he went for his mukanda and he was circumcised. He came back to school and we all found out about it because someone couldn't keep their mouth shut. Let's see. Yeah, so like I mentioned with genetics and so on, genetics is influenced, like our phenotypes, especially height, is really influenced by diet because a lot of the people that were very tall had cows. They used to drink a lot of milk. And this is an oversimplified explanation of that, but if you look at China today, a lot of the Chinese kids are taller than their parents or grandparents because they have been drinking a lot of milk. And milk does contribute to making people taller. And the Bantu were cattle herders and they grew up on milk. When I was younger, I thought they thought I was going to be tall until I went to boarding school and it stressed me out and I stopped like eating my home diet. I went too young, but I leveled out. So I think with the height of the ancient Egyptians, I think it had a lot to do with the environment because they went through a lot of trauma and they went through a lot of changes in that region. And maybe that might have leveled them out over time. And also, maybe they weren't such a big colony to begin with because when you compare them to the people in ancient Somalia, not before the invasion of the Islamists, the people of ancient Somalia were much taller. Well, that was something, even ancient Ethiopia, that was one of the first things people always remarked. It was their height. And that's why when we study African history, we have to be able to sort of really critically think about what we're looking at when we're being fed the narrative that the Sudanese have been in that region for a long time. But when you look at their neighbors, they look very different from their neighbors. Like if they had been there from the beginning, there should be a blend, because that's how genetics is. There's a blend, but there is sort of an abrupt halt until you move towards West Africa. Then you start to find a lot of Sudanese-looking people in Senegal, for example. They're just bigger built. Like this, they're not as lean as the Sudanese in Sudan. They're bigger they're more like, especially the ones that do the wrestling, you know. So that's I think that's important. If we look at genetics and physical phenotypes, there's a lot of context that needs to be accounted for. Okay, so with the Bantu expansion, like I'm always very careful with that idea that the Bantu expanded, because I believe that from what the evidence that shows is that the Bantu are as old as the stone ruins, because they're the ones who built those stone ruins. So with the Sahara, there's a group that's unaccounted for, really. We don't know much about the Berbers, and then there are other populations that were sort of in the Mauritania region before the pre-Arabization and the pre-Islamization and the pre-caliphates and the pre-Sudanese, because the Sudanese, remember, were the Zanj. They came up the Mediterranean and came down West Africa and entered through West Africa. And yes, the Fung Sultanate eventually came through. They came through Ethiopia, but that was after Aksum had fallen, because there was no entrance on the East African coast for a long time for them to come through, because there was Aksum. They were very powerful kingdoms in that region, so there was no inlet. So they had to sort of come to the Mediterranean, above the Mediterranean, and come back down. And so there are a lot of people unaccounted for, especially in North Africa. And we still have to sort of account for them. And that is, they used to come and they would burn the relics and the writings. They would burn things. And that's why we have very few scripts, and the scripts that are survived were the ones that were written on stone and not the ones that were written on parchment. It's not that Africa didn't have scripts, because how do we keep languages if we don't have scripts? Like in my tribe, we have a word for a writing which is called lukwalo, ulemba. We have a word for writing that's ulemba. The word for parchment is lugwalo. So how does a population that doesn't write have words for things like that? They shouldn't. So the idea, and anyway, the drawings, the symbols on the houses, they showed that writing was part of life, because those symbols were passed down. They meant something, and everything that we write are basically symbols, and we add meaning to those symbols. And we know that the crocodile was a symbol of Sibu or Sobek, and the discs were symbols. So these symbols existed, and they were part of the language. So I firmly believe the scripts were there, the writing systems were there, but because they were parchment, they were easy to hide and burn, because in Southern Africa, what would become Matabeleland was raided for over 20 years. No one could access that region for 20 years. They were moving things, they were stealing, and that's what the German guy, Karl Marx, remarked on. He said that, he pointed it out, like they are stealing out of that place, they're taking everything, and they had been doing this for 20 years. That's how long it took for them to empty it out. meaning there was so much that was taken from there, much more than we could ever imagine. Oh, you do pulling in your culture too. I know. I know it's every it's that just shows like cuz it's like and and I was going to talk about that, but I know like I needed to approach it with a lot of sensitivity because there's some women who've gone through it and they hated it and it was pressure. They were put under pressure to do it. And others weren't put under pressure. Like I was never pressured about it. And so it wasn't a traumatic experience or anything like that. But yeah. Yeah, that's pulling. It's an old practice too. It's really ancient. Like Sudan. So Sudan is a word from that comes from it means black. So the reason I say that is because when you read Al Jahiz, if you Google Al Jahiz, um, the what is Fukra Al Sudan, oh, it's just like the superiority of the blacks over the whites. Basically, that's the rough translation to it. He uses Sudan to describe the blacks, and Sudan means black. According to how he contextualizes it, and he was a really respected scholar in Basra, Iraq, and he was part Zand or Sudanese, or and so he wrote a lot about what would become natural what what is that evolution or zoology. He's known to have been the father of zoology, and that also sort of starts to explain why breeding was very important to the Sudanese because they understood it to the like it's something they practiced, and that's why part of it is they maintained their physical features better than most other people because they do have a caste system. I think it looks like it, where the higher castes are not allowed to intermix and intermarry, so that's why they were very picky about who they intermarried or mixed with. Do that group circumcision. Yeah, because when about uncircumcision, when they started doing the whole thing of female genital mutilation, that's why like I was like, yeah, that's not us, because for us women were free. They weren't property. They were taught, they had their own urgency and autonomy, so they never like that didn't happen. It was more of pulling, if anything. That's what happened. And apparently pulling is an old practice. It was done in ancient India. It was done so many places, I guess. And perhaps perhaps a video about that should be done. But yeah. But we've hit almost 2 hours. Are there any last questions before we close up in like 5 minutes? And thank you so much, you guys, for doing this and sticking it out with me for 2 hours. Thank you. I had fun. I hope it was there was a lot of information to be learned from this, and I do hope if you know anybody that wants to understand the language deeper and wants to basically understand the sounds deeper, that is available on my coffee. I always make that available. And oops. I shouldn't have opened that, but um, yeah, that's available in the coffee, and we can go from there. I'm still trying to, I shouldn't have opened that the way I did. But in Botswana now they send you to hospital. Oh, for the circumcision. Well, on why there are no hieroglyphs on the pyramids. Let me think about that. First, it's important to remember that, okay, so inside the pyramids, I guess. I think it has to do with the symbolism of the pyramid shape itself, because when we look at the ancient the art, sorry, I just screenshot most of the stuff. Oh gosh, I didn't screenshot that one. So the obelisks, for example, had a certain shape to them, and for the pyramids, not. Okay, so if we go to Sudan, ancient Sudan, where there were more pyramids there, or Malo, some of the pyramids in ancient Sudan had hieroglyphs in them, actually. But the pyramid of Giza itself didn't. That's because I think it was more of a jundu. It was more of a portal, of a gateway, than one that was actually meant to bury people in. So I think that's why it was different, because it served a slightly different function than the actual smaller pyramids like the ones found in ancient Sudan, which had hieroglyphs in them. Okay. Okay. All right. So yeah, I am still working on the book. These are the chapters of the book, just to wind up, and then we'll have the app ready to go, hopefully soon, I hope. But if you want to support the development of the app, there's a link on the Coffee account where you can do that, because most of the donations go towards supporting the development of everything about the language. So we've set up the ancient Egyptian iOS app to a goal of 9,500. So if you'd like to support that, or you know some people who would like to support that, please share so that we can get to our goal as quickly as possible. And have that developed and ready to use. Okay, so one thing I know for certain is that a lot of what we see today is not what was there in the ancient world. A lot was changed. So it's like now when we can see that the ancient Egyptian language is a Proto-Bantu language. I mean, we've all this time have been fed the idea that it wasn't even related to Africa. So a lot was taken out of Africa, a lot was changed, and there's a lot of information we a lot of the scripts, the manuscripts were taken. There are a lot of manuscripts. The ones we see in museums, I don't even think are the tip of the iceberg of what they found, because we're talking about a civilization that was ancient. It was thousands of years old. So there was a lot to be found and to be taken. So to say that they they weren't the way they built, they didn't show dates. They may have thought of dates very differently than we do today, because dates and time are not linear. We think of it in linear terms. So the technology also was very different. They used sound, whereas we don't use sound as much, but sound is a very important technology. They understood how to harness it and use it. They also, whether we like it or not, teleported. That is something that we don't remember how to do. They were able to talk to animals, and that was something that was talked about in ancient. Many African cultures have stories of people talking to animals, or people basically just being able to communicate with animals. Or there were the bees, the birds that led people to beehives, because some of the people understood how to speak the bird language. They understood the bird sounds, and they would make them to call the birds when they needed them, to take them to beehives so they could find honey. So they were called honey hunting birds. And there's a lot of technology that has changed that we don't understand anymore, or we don't have access to. So those are it. We just have to keep piecing it together by finding the ancient sources and putting it all together, because there's some ancient sources that are available to us and some that are not, and we can sort of build from that. But I think it's just technological differences. That's why we don't really understand, or it feels so far away from us right now. Let's see. What about all the... Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have to look at the other. I suppose I'll have to look more into the other glyphs, but honestly, I would have to look into more detail into the Georgian calendar, because I have read about it just in passing, and I always thought it was based off their presumed date of Jesus's birth. That's what I always thought it was based off of, but I would have to look into that some more. But I do know that the pyramid of Giza is sort of in line with the, what do you call that? The Great Zimbabwe. It's when they're just off by a few degrees. They're these ancient monument, they're these ancient buildings that are sort of, they align. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for staying. And yes, it's past the 5-minute mark. And thank you so much, you guys, for coming. I really appreciate it. And I will be happy to do another live stream soon and get a few. And in that one, I think will cover the Sudanese, the Zanj, basically invasion, the Nilo-Saharan invasion of Africa, and kind of go through that and explain it better. Sekere is 1,000. Okay. All right. I will remember that. But thank you so much for coming and for staying. All right. Thank you.